First of all, I just want to thank everybody for coming, particularly those of you who are running small businesses. I know what happens when you're not there. Somebody else has to step in and, right?
Yes.
There's a lot to do. So thank you very much, because this is very, very, very valuable. As the President just said, we are here to really listen to some of the thoughts and ideas that you might have that we might not have seen yet, that you see on the ground that we can put to work right away to create jobs. So that's our purpose. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking. I'm just going to, welcome you here. I'm going to tell you a little bit. I think a lot of you know about the Small Business Administration. I'm the administrator of the Small Business Administration. We have a number of things that many of you have taken advantage of. They're on the table for discussion, for your thoughts about how we can continue in some of those efforts. We have a $90 billion loan guarantee portfolio. As many of you know, in the Recovery Act, we were able to raise those guarantees to 90%, do about $16 billion in additional lending. I know that some of you are part of the SBA activity. We have about 14,000 affiliated counselors out there. And I always say to the small businesses out there, if you don't have a counselor, you should, and they're free. Because it's not just the money, it's all the tools that you need to help grow your business and create jobs. We also are responsible for making sure that 23% of all government contracts go to small businesses, and that's about $100 billion a year. So once again, I know that some contractors are here in the room. That's something that we can hear more about from you. And we have a disaster operation that hopefully none of you have had to participate in, but for natural disasters from hurricanes and floods. So we're delighted that you're going to be here. We're eager to hear your comments. Tim, I think you might have some opening comments as well.
First of all, compliment Karen. She's done a great job in trying to take this agency and make it a much more powerful, nimble, responsive agency. I think on her watch, you've seen small business lending, SBA guaranteed loans go up by 75%, which is a pretty quick return. I think there are two sets of things that would be most helpful to hear from you guys on, you men and women on. First is about credit financing. We have tried, and we're open to looking for other ways to try to make sure we're relaxing credit constraints that small businesses face. Our challenge is how to figure out ways to do that can happen quickly and that will work. Don't leave the taxpayer with too much exposure to risk, but willing to take risk. We think there's going to be good return on that risk. The second is in the tax area. There's a variety of special tax incentives for small businesses in the Recovery Act that we're open to consider extending, modifying, expanding, changing in some ways. Happy to hear other ideas too outside those areas. But in the credit area, both in terms of how the SBA works, but also in terms of other things we can do directly through banks, that would be helpful, but also on the tax front. And I think Karen's got the right suggestion, which is let's go around the room and let people running small businesses start. Give you a chance to just give us a couple minutes each on what you want us to focus on, and then we want to hear from a bunch of the other talent in the room.
So who's in the room who's got a small business? All right, I know, Woody, I'm going to start with you. I warned you, right? It's not a phone call.
Well, first of all,
Tell just a little bit about your business, and then give us some of your thoughts.
I want to thank you, President, for allowing us to have one to be able to at least express our concerns. And
You know what? We have a great team here. Ginger Lou from the National Economic Council. Of course, you know Valerie Jarrett. They ask if you can say your name and your company.
Woody, sorry.
No, that's okay. My name is Woody Hall, and the name of my organization is Diversipac. We are a film manufacturer, flexible films, and we're in contract manufacturing. We employ roughly about 700 employees. We're over 10 locations, and we're in 5 different states. Our growth over the last couple of years has been has been probably in the range of around 20%, and that's something that is nice to be able to say, but from a sustainability standpoint, that's a whole nother issue, and one of the reasons that I'm glad that I'm here. Our challenge over these last 24 to 36 months, even with that growth, is that the credit market has totally been closed to us. Totally. All of this has been done basically through owner financing, our own equity, and through local and state grants. Our most recent story is we just opened up a new manufacturing facility, employing about 50 employees, and we have a expected growth rate of about 150 over the next 3 years. And these are technical jobs, but in the course of this $20 million enterprise that we opened up, we basically had no banking finance. We could not get one bit of bank finance, nor from the community bank, nor any of the local, from the national standpoint, national footprint organizations. Again, it was through owner equity, and also through, in this case, at Tyrone, Pennsylvania, it was with the governor, Ed Rendell, and his development group. And again, it was grants and bonds. So we've been able to open the facility. It opened beginning of October. But from a sustainability standpoint, our ability to be able to continue this growth rate, which we will have to be, we will have to do that in order to continue to be competitive in the marketplace that we're in. We will not be able to do that. So our ability to be able to get this cash that is out there is very, very imperative for us to find ways to be able to break through. And one of the things that we have run into, looking at how the banking models that are used in terms of for the lending, we think that there has to be, we know that lending has to be done responsibly, but in terms of when you look at the models that have been used in the past, and you look at where we are as an economy right now, we aren't sure if those are still appropriate. And if there is is there some way to look at how to address the, probably the unfairness that stands with the current models versus where we need to be moving forward. Because if you look at how assets are valued on a market-to-market basis, and we're a heavily asset-based organization. Our assets today are worth $1 million, and we're lending against those. And tomorrow they're worth $200,000, and the bank says you're in default. And we want, first of all, we want you to pay our loan off, and we'd like for you to find another banking institution. And you say, wait, what? I mean, my assets were worth $1 million yesterday. But that's a reality. And maybe it's not a day, but in 30 days, with the market volatility, our assets go up and down all the time. As a lending base from an ABL, we are vulnerable. And those are the issues that we're facing. And so from a banking standpoint, lending practice, that's something that we think.
Tim and I did a conference 2 weeks ago just on this issue of small business lending, and you're not the only one having this issue. This was very much part of that conversation as well. Do you want to say anything, or do you want to?
Could I interrupt? This session is being videotaped, and unfortunately, the microphone is sensitive enough to pick up people's BlackBerry. So when you're tapping away, it's actually being picked up here and distorting the speaker's voice and masking
Okay,
the
so
voice. So if I
it's
could
like
just
a,
ask
you know,
you not to.
Eric isn't here, is he? It's a no internet zone here at the moment,
Twitter. There is no such thing as
Oh, right, I knew that, yeah. Should we maybe go on to hear some more from, maybe
Sure,
David, you want to
sure.
talk?
Be happy to talk. My name is David Barber, and I'm an owner and executive vice president of Barber Foods. We're a small manufacturer of poultry, prepared poultry products up in Portland, Maine. And over the years, we've actually become one of the larger employers of Portland, Maine. So my issue is a little different, but runs right at the same spot that you're facing. We have about 750 associates. They're from 50 countries around the world, so we provide a lot of training, education, and of that nature to get people up to stuff with learning English as a second language, etc. Our biggest single challenge that we're facing today is with the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. Their concern, as we are, about salmonella in chicken, and are proposing new regulations that could potentially put our business at risk and put our associates' job at risk without improving food safety. So here's a situation where the regulation is actually affecting our ability to borrow. You know, you go tell your bank that and see what kind of reaction you get. It's not very pretty. You go tell your suppliers of our raw materials or even our customers that, it's not very pretty. So, you know, we face the same issues. We're on an ABL line. It's trying to get those numbers together and make it work, and so far we have. But we're not able to get the funding we need to make our business more efficient and effective because of some of the regulatory issues. So one of the things we want to make sure of is that we do talk to the people in charge and make sure they understand that how regulation can affect a business like Barber Foods. We're all for food safety. We are 100% for food safety. We just want regulation to be agile and to have it smart. Those are very important things. I would like to comment today through the help of Administrator Karen Mills and through our representative, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree. We got a hearing with Tom Vilsack about this issue. And we've been going through this for a year through this regulation morass. It's been the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And we got somebody to listen. We got somebody to say, hey, this isn't quite right. We got somebody to listen to say, we'll work with you and we'll correct it. It's not done yet, but at least we're working in the right direction. So for other small companies, I don't know how they will be able to pull this together and make it work. We got very fortunate that we have some excellent representatives in our state, our governor, all of our representatives got involved. Karen's been very helpful, so we've been lucky. I don't know how many other small businesses face this issue.
We have behind us, I think, small business?
Yes, yes. Good afternoon, I'm Angie Selden. I'm the CEO of a company called Arise Virtual Solutions. We have about 15,000 people working from their homes in the United States. The reason why this is a really important part of job creation for the country is that we've actually repatriated those jobs from offshore call center outsourced companies. If you imagine for a moment that there's 1 million call center jobs that have moved from the United States to offshore countries in the last 10 years and continue to move offshore at a pace of 100,000 jobs per year, there's really three things that we believe can really make a difference in terms of accelerating bringing those jobs back to the United States. The first one is the ability for people in local communities to be given access to technology training. 23% of our agents today are in communities of 15,000 people or less. So imagine for a moment if we can take some of the money that's being earmarked for education, and instead of training necessarily just next generation folks, but training folks that today can be put to work working from their home, doing customer service or sales calls, that educational money will immediately create jobs in the United States. The second, which is a wonderful example of the congruence of globalization and economic development, is the ability to take the high-speed internet investments that are being contemplated and accelerating those internet investments. We believe that closing that last mile and being able to bring high-speed or broadband access to these local communities will allow people to remain in those communities and be able to provide for their families and work without having to leave those local communities and move back to a larger city where obviously jobs are more competitive. And then number 3, in order to encourage large corporations in the United States to repatriate these jobs, we encourage the government to consider a small tax advantage for a period of 1 year only to close the gap between the very small percentage difference that it exists between the cost to offshore a job and the cost to homeshore a job into someone's home. It's less than 10%. And what we believe is once that first year economic difference gap has been closed, what occurs then is the efficiency and effectiveness of those folks who are in the local community taking phone calls from their local folks will be a much more effective and efficient means of getting your questions answered when you're calling for assistance. We're finding that nearly 3 times the number of calls need to be placed to an offshore provider in order to get a person's question answered than having it be answered for the first time by someone in the local community. So in the end, the overall cost advantage to companies in the United States will be dramatic because nearly 2/3 of their transaction costs will be eliminated when the call gets answered and the question gets answered the first time. So those are 3 things that we believe could really bring 1 million jobs back to the United States.
Eric, that's a lead-in, I thought, to maybe, Eric, you run a business, it's a little bigger than the small business, but, you know,
It was
you get to
small.
fit right in here. And I think you're facilitating enormous numbers of small businesses.
Thanks to you, Administrator Mills, for your leadership. Of course, the Secretary has been through quite the crisis with great impact on our country. So first place, 2/3 of our revenue comes from small and medium businesses. 1/3 comes from large businesses. Historically, the 2/3 from small businesses was growing faster than the large businesses. When the recession hit, both went down, and I'm pleased to say that Google's business overall is running well, but a lot of the growth is coming from the top third. So the question is why, right? Is there something wrong with our products? Are we doing something wrong? You know, as I think everybody knows, we have an advertising product which is very self-service. It works very well. People like it. It's a great alternative to your own sales force. And the answer is because they have the problems that have been exemplified by the comments that you've seen so far. So in digging into it, it turns out that the average small business is owned by Joe, Bob, Beth, Mary, what have you. They run it, they understand their business very well, and they make their payroll every week. And it's that kind of a business. They just don't have the capital. They get the capital through the loans, the ABL loans and others. And they tell me they cannot get financing. And why can't they get financing? They don't know, right? I think that's the problem. So there is this SBA, which is a great group. They either don't know how to work with you guys, or there's not enough money for them, or it's not happening fast enough. But trying to represent their voice, they had money, right? They had lending, and now they don't have it. From their perspective, it's very easy to understand what the problem is. So my suggestion is that this is to some degree a regulatory issue, to the degree that you regulate the banks. I don't really understand how you do this. It must be very hard. We gave them a lot of
You have legislation, you have no idea.
We gave them a lot of money, and they've essentially, as a rough description, they have strengthened their reserve balances, which is required by regulation. So maybe some modification of some of those rules, done cleverly, could free this logjam. And to me, I think that's what they asked. That's the message they asked me to pass along to you all.
All right, let's talk about this
Maybe you
for,
have a sense for-
let's talk for this a little bit, and then we'll go around. And we do have a banker in the room. Dorothy, I think you're the only banker here. So you'll be able to carry that burden of helping explain why this is so hard.
I have a partner in crime.
Oh, you do?
Jesse
Oh,
Turner.
good. All right, Jesse.
He's hiding over
But
here.
let's
but-
just pause for 1 second. Let's
Yeah.
try to get into this problem a little deeper. Small businesses, about 90% of their credit comes from banks. Unlike large businesses, for them it's about 40% or half. About half of that credit comes from small banks, not large banks. A lot of it was credit cards. You guys know this more than I do, but let me just see if I got this right. A lot of it was home equity or backed by some other form of real estate. And And those are the parts of the financing business, in some ways, that went away the most quickly as credit turned. Now, small businesses look more risky today. True in any recession. Banks are sort of rationally a little more risk averse these days. Even banks with a lot of capital are a little more careful in how they're using their capital. A lot of banks across the country, though, don't have enough capital still. And they're very exposed to commercial real estate, and they're having to pull back. And what you're seeing is the consequence of what always happens in a recession following a financial crisis is you see credit terms were too loose, and banks tend to overcorrect the other way. And that can lead to outcomes where you have viable businesses, good franchises, less good risk of default, starved of credit, and that can cause well, it can amplify the recession. So it's a good public policy case for trying to work against that. Now, banks say, of course, that part of what's happening is not just that they were imprudent or they're being a little more careful these days. What they say is that their supervisors or examiners are pushing them too hard to tighten up. And I'm sure there's a bit of that too, because supervisors like banks, they might have got caught being a little loose. They want to be sure to be careful and prudent going forward. So there must be some of that happening. Now, there are three or four types of things that we have been doing and can try to do to help mitigate this. We've tried to make capital available to small banks, very economically attractively priced capital to small banks, as well as to CDFIs. That is very efficient because a dollar of capital from the government can support $8 to $10 in lending capacity. So that's a good use of taxpayers' money, got good leverage. Banks, though, as you know, don't particularly want to come take capital from the government because they're deeply worried about the stigma and the conditions that come. Can't force them to come. Even when they come, of course, you can't force them to lend with their capital. But it is very economically compelling to lend now because the price of borrowing is very low and cost of credit is high, and that's usually what helps solve this problem over time. So we've try to make it quite economic to lend, but you can't force them to lend. But capital is very critical. Second is Karen's suite of programs in the SBA, which, as I said, she's done very effectively, and the President's announced support for expanding those. We're looking at ways to make those more powerful, make people more confident in them. But the SBA is going to be a small part of lending to small business. I don't know, Karen, we're at the peak, but you're probably at your peak, 35% of total small business lending. We've actually been very effective in trying to get the secondary markets to open up a bit, and that can help too. Provide a little more liquidity. Banks can sell their loans more easily in the secondary market. That creates capital. That helps too. And the supervisors, although I think banks would like to see more, have issued a series of guidance to examiners to try to make sure examiners are bringing a more balanced approach to looking at classified loans and don't overdo it on the other side. They issued a guidance recently on how to deal with a situation where a loan backed by some piece of property decline in value, but cash flow is pretty good for that business. You don't want to see the loan criticized excessively for that. That's helping. They're looking at other things to do in that area too, on the guidance side. But I think our basic challenge in some ways is to figure out, because we're not going to have the government lend directly to small businesses. Not something we can do, not want us to do. I think our best way is to try to figure out how to get Karen's programs, that's what we think is more powerful, more nimble, people have more confidence want to use them, and to try to figure out ways to make it more compelling for banks to be able to come and take advantage of these programs we have that provide capital temporarily at pretty low cost. But that requires a little help from Congress too to try to reduce the stigma. And I think Karen might be good to turn to Joe now and ask Joe Stiglitz if he'd want to say a few things about this, since much of his life's work is how financial markets fail,
Sure.
and how credit markets get broken, how they can be fixed.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Let me just reiterate what's been already said about the importance of this from a public policy perspective. As you know, I don't have to obviously explain to you that small businesses have been the source of job creation and job destruction, and so we have to do something about that. And secondly, the data is overwhelming over the role of credit constraints in that they're facing, and it's getting worse. Actually, the recent data I've seen, actually, that over 50% of all small businesses are now saying that they are having difficulty getting credit, and that they are partly as a result going to be cutting back on expansion and jobs. So things could be getting worse in this area rather than better. So I think it really is a good thing that you are focusing on it. Let me focus, as you said, on the question of what can be done about credit, but also talk very briefly about two other areas that have been mentioned. I think that, and I'll put aside the politics of what you can get through Congress and that's your job. So let me talk about what I think ought to be or could be done from at least a theoretical perspective. The first is we've had programs, CRA, that I think have been fairly effective in increasing lending to underserved communities. Other countries have had programs that have been targeted and said, but if you're a bank, you have to lend 10% to small businesses. Certainly within the purview of what you could do. And it seems to me to go back particularly for those banks that have ever received money from the government under TARP, to say, the fact that you've paid it back doesn't, they've gotten advantage of the guarantees, they've gotten advantage of a whole set of programs. It seems to me that totally reasonable to say that you have to figure out ways of lending to small businesses. And the history of CRA, I think, is very positive in this, in that the returns, the quality of CRA lending is as good as any other lending. That after you give them the encouragement to go out and do it, they figure out how to judge credit worthiness. And so, and that's even true in the mortgage default rates. I mean, so it seems to me that that's at least one framework that's worked in other countries, and it could work here. The second thing is, and this is going a little bit further than probably is currently on the, but in terms of, the Fed is lending at 0 interest rates. And as you know, there's widespread feeling, whether it's accurate or not, that much of that is going to speculative lending, creating an asset bubbles all over the world, when the intent of having the Fed lend to the banks is to create jobs and including small businesses. It seems to me very reasonable to say, we're not going to give money to Goldman Sachs, or to name a firm at random, if you are using this for speculation. $500 million is a peanut compared to the help that you're getting from us. If you're going to take money from the Fed, you have to show that you are creating jobs. So I would put, in a broad area, conditional lending. We talk about for welfare programs. We've all over the world we've put in conditions that you have to behave well to get welfare programs, and they've proven very effective at incentives. I say, access to the Fed window is going to be conditional on certain types of programs. So that's a secondary. Now, as you pointed out...
Can I just point out, Joe, I want to make sure, I should have said this before, the program the President announced a few weeks ago, that is a program where banks can small banks can apply to get capital from the Treasury. Again, very economically, attractively priced capital. If they come and provide a plan, rather than use that capital to expand lending to small business. So the basic spirit of
That's very much
that
the
thing,
spirit.
I agree with.
I think that's great. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and the third is, as you pointed out, that one of the major sources of finance for small businesses is credit cards. And our credit card system is really broken in many ways, much more deeply than even the Congress has talked about. The fact that there's effectively a 2 to 3% tax in these exchange fees. A modern electronic payments mechanism, that should be like 25 cents. I don't know how much you could do it for if you were running it. What?
About that.
Yeah.
There's a reason why it's 2.6%.
It has the anti-competitive practices of the banking system. This could be fixed overnight, and other countries have done
There's a lot of
it.
jobs within that
What?
industry. That 2.6% employs a lot of people.
Yes, but that's not where the money is going.
I was being
Which is, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
The point is, other countries have dealt with this problem and show you can bring it down. And it's a 2% tax on the whole industry. I mean, on all small businesses who visas. A lot of these are small margin. You can imagine, you know, if you're on a small business and your margin is small and you're giving half of that to the bank in exchange fees, how aggravating that is. And so it's both on the cost side and on the access, you know, all of this gets access to capital. So I think that legislation that would bring down credit card charges on all ways as a source of funds and as running the payment mechanism is absolutely essential. The fourth thing is a little bit of follow-up on your idea of getting money to banks who do the right thing. I don't know whether this is again feasible, but I would even conceive of encouragement and creation of new banks as a new small businesses. There are a couple of small, you know, why not say this is a, you know, viable? We've destroyed 124 banks this year. Many of whom were not in lending to small businesses, but were in real estate speculation. But if we created banks that were focused on lending, you know, it's not up to the SBA to do the credit judgment, but you create that as a business.
That's a very good.
We've had people actually
Yeah,
bring up that's a very interesting idea.
No, it's a very good suggestion, and what we found when we talked to banks, but I've never run a bank, so users who run banks would know better. What they say is to build a branch network to get deposits, and to build the basic infrastructure to actually make loans actually takes quite a long time. And so even though the economics of it seem powerful now, most people choose to come in and try to recapitalize a bank that needs capital, use that as a device for entry. But I think we should ask our bankers, Karen, if you're willing, to
Yes.
Dorothy and Jesse,
Yes.
it's Jesse, right?
Yes.
Why don't you guys say a little bit about, you don't need to defend your record as banks, just say what you think would help on the credit front.
Well, as a $153 million community,
Say your name, the bank. and
Dorothy
everything.
Bridges, and I'm the CEO and president of City First Bank of Washington, D.C., so I'm a local gal.
Hometown bank.
Hometown. 11 years in its existence, and we were formed expressly to provide community development banking to.
Okay.
We were formed expressly to provide community development banking to the low-wealth communities in Northern Fourth Washington, Northern Virginia, and Maryland. And we've grown to about $153 million. And it's no secret, banks are at the center stage each and every day for the last 2.5 years. And so you've heard a lot of the noise about why banks got there in the first place. The one thing that I'd like to stress is that community banks are businesses too, and they're small businesses. The average size of banks in this country is about 125 million, employing close to 30 to 40 individuals across the board. So that makes us a small business, and our very business is lending. And so for me, that's the core of our business model, is to loan money, and generally, in 90% of the cases, money to small businesses. Like many of you around the room, in terms of regulatory burden, we have it too. And we have it in such a way that sometimes is pro-cyclical, that a lot of our issues has to do with serving the needs of our customers, but also the 800-pound elephant in the room is the regulatory environment that we also have to deal with. And everybody is nervous. Everybody needs to be prudent with what's been happening in this economy. Some of the things that will help tremendously for us as community banks is to have access to capital. And thanks to Secretary Geithner and Administrator Mills, there is, in the next couple of days, I believe, an announcement that some of the TARP funds that are available will be actually a portion for community banks to help
So is
build
that
the capital.
something- Talk some more about that, because we're interested to make sure that that gets out there and works. Is that
Absolutely.
something You don't have to say if you're gonna take advantage
Yes,
of it or
yes.
not.
I
But
think
that you
it's-
think banks are gonna step up and take advantage of it.
I think banks could step up and take advantage of it, but there's a couple of things that need to happen in order for it to do it. If the program is merely just to make the funds available and nothing changes on the regulatory side, there won't be any expansion, in my opinion. There are a number of banks who would have liked to have taken advantage of it when it was at 5%, and the government would have gotten an extra 300 basis points return. But because of the regulatory scrutiny and the recommendations by the primary regulator to Treasury, that these banks were not being recommended to take advantage of it, they didn't. And just to lower the rate is not enough. That there has to be some flexibility by the regulators to open and expand the opportunity for more of the banks to take advantage, particularly with community development banks, CDFI banks, more specifically. The other issue is that at an average of 125 million in asset size, if you talk about risk-weighted assets, 2% is not a lot of money, so you can't do a lot with it. So to expand that 2% of risk-rated assets to 5% is more. And then the third thing is that $1 billion bank or less, that gets at a good number, but 5 billion or less gets at a much greater number. And so those are the three things that is a recommendation from, my side of the table for community banks to be able to start or expand programs to help small businesses.
That's very helpful.
Yes, thank you for the invite. I'm Jesse Turner, president of Tri-State Bank of Memphis. We've been around about 60-some years. We became a CDFI about a year ago, primarily to try to keep the TARP money that we were applying for required us to have warrants. And if we were CDFI, we would not have warrants, which would allow the Treasury to sell stock to other people. And our directors were quite concerned about that. We've been doing, I guess, development lending for years without being called a CDFI. Our bank does a good bit of business with church loans primarily, and we do have a good bit of number of commercial borrowers. At one point, my thought would be that we don't have a lot. But on my way up on the plane this morning, I just started trying to write down businesses that created jobs, the ones that we belonged to that didn't. And we've had, I think,
Looks like a long list.
well, yeah, I write big. But basically, we received some of the TARP money. We think it was a good idea, and actually we did it more as a for proactive reasons. But it turned out the examination we got right after we got it was not a good one, and we ended up with more substandard loans, so the capital really helped. And anything we could do to get more TARP money, better priced, I think would be good for us. A lot of what I've heard today, we're seeing with commercial borrowers. We also are finding with at least one big bank in town in Memphis, which basically seems to be tossing out its commercial borrowers. We've had several come to us saying that Bank X, has called our loan. And what's happened? Well, our collateral value is down, or you're making your payments well. Yes, we're making them, but they're saying they want the loan called, not just put on, say, principal and interest, your amortized basis, but just call the note in general. And some of these have been, one we couldn't deal with. He was a $1 million builder who had several properties that he was not able to, I guess, cash flow. And so essentially, we just said, well, he was losing money. We didn't think we could take on his problem. That's just kind of an example, but let me try to get to a couple of sort of suggestions. I like the idea of some of what we've heard here today about help, but I think there's a major problem with that. With the collateral values on decline, even if you encourage and incentivize the banks to do more, even if you set up CRA, my bank's been a great advocate of CRA over the years, but how can you make someone lend to someone when the value isn't there, On the one hand, you've got the value not present, you've got the regulators saying, we'd like to help you, but you don't have the collateral decline won't let you. So my question is, what would be wrong with maybe changing that? There's a supervisory limit which basically says, if I recall correctly, that essentially you have, for commercial properties, the loan to value, if it exceeds 85%, the aggregate amount of those loans cannot exceed 30% of your capital. I'm sure you're aware of that. And if it's residential, residential and commercial combined, those exceptions can't exceed 100%. But what would be wrong with either raising the limit, raising the 85% and the 90% and take them higher? Now, let's say maybe you made it 100%, maybe you make it 120. The problem becomes, how do you distinguish, if you increase that limit, how do you do it in such a way that you help some of the folks who are otherwise would be able to pay, like some of the gentlemen in the room that I've heard. And I guess that's the question. Is it and I'm sure when those were set in place, they were done to try to protect banks. But what if, could we not take a look at maybe relaxing those and maybe replace that with something else? And not just, in other words, maybe you can handle the cash flow, but you don't have the collateral, which basically means we'd be making more of an unsecured loan. Now, we might be.
Did you look at this? Have you looked at this guidance that the Fed and the other guys put out 4 weeks ago?
I looked at the guidance, and
Doesn't do enough?
actually I've been wading through that. The guidance helps. I think it helps tremendously.
Heading in
because-
the direction you're describing.
Well, it
Well,
does, I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah, it heads in the direction that you were describing, but what it does is that unsecured portion is considered impaired. And so the direction says you have to charge it off. So it hits your loan loss provision. Even though you put a plan in place to collect it from the borrower, you charge it off and you treat it as a recovery. So it hits us in our capital.
yeah.
I'm sorry, just keep going.
Now, the guidance helps tremendously. In fact, I was going to mention that. However, it just hit. And I think the big question is, how quickly can the word get out? And how quickly, and how will it be applied? Because sometimes, and what I liked about the guidance, it has lots of scenarios, but even with scenarios, there's still questions. So how are the examiners going to apply it? And more particularly, how will the loan reviewers? Our problem currently is, and I hate to say this on camera, but our loan reviewers have been harder on us than the regulators. And that's bad. We use outside consulting firm. So if they want to classify loans that the examiners will pass, we have a tough time because we have to ignore the advice of the consultant, which then gets us in trouble with the regulators. So, you know, and I know some of this is kind of, you know, disjointed, but the point I'm making is that.
Just to ask, we'll move on, but just give me one more second.
Yeah.
Do the supervisors require you to use these outside loan reviewers, or do you do that just as a reinforcing check and
Well, our
balance?
bank is so small that we don't have the expertise internally to perform the function, so we have to outsource it. Now, hopefully, they'll look at the guidance and get religion.
Mr.
What-
Secretary,
Let-
the other is the accounting rule too, on
I
that.
thought we'd hear from accounting, but go ahead, Jesse, you finish
Yeah,
up.
let me
and then-
make just one quick point. The SBA program that you have, I think, is a good one, but we've not gotten to look at it in great detail, and we do have at least one borrower who's trying to keep their payments up by using the other one, the American Recovery. But years ago, the SBA had a low doc program, and I'm wondering, if the current, if the current one doesn't use it, the low doc was very, very well received. The turnarounds were excellent, and we had borrowers who we could get in and out very quickly. When you have to go through the other program that replaced it, you almost have to have an internal expert on staff to deal with that. And so if you could look at maybe reinstating a low doc, I think that would be appreciated.
Well, and that's something that's very much appreciated. I think one thing I've heard from a lot of small businesses, the simpler you can make it, the more transparent online you can make it. And we've been working on trying to do that so that people can come into the program easily, and banks can use their own documentation, so that's something helpful. So we probably should get some of the other folks into this discussion, and access to capital is something we're hearing a lot about, but there's some other ideas I know out here around entrepreneurship. We got a lot of entrepreneurs in the room, and Carl, maybe you want to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. You recently wrote something about job creation coming from small young businesses, I know, and we have a lot of efforts at around the administration. Ginger Lewis is running some around innovation. How are we going to take all these investments in innovation and get more entrepreneurs and get more jobs?
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me, Mr. Secretary. I'm Carl Schramm. I'm from the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City. Our founder, Ewing Kauffman, was an iconic American entrepreneur, and what distinguished him from many philanthropists is he understood the transit of life was from destitute poverty to dying a billionaire. And he devoted his estate to our foundation to make the process of entrepreneurship much more accessible for Americans. He saw this as the journey from poverty to dignity, as the president said, and self-responsible behavior as good citizens. Just by way of background, I've started 4 companies. Once upon a time, I was an academic economist. But when it became very clear I was at no risk of getting a Nobel Prize, I started a company. Anyway, luck would have it, I got to run this foundation. Now, this foundation is the only foundation in the United States that really attends to the question of entrepreneurship. And as we spend money, we're about $2 billion. All of our money really is based on the thesis that we're not going to make mistakes, so we do a huge amount of research. My dear colleague, Bob White, controls our research budget, and I think we're probably the largest private agency funding academic and economic research in the country. So the few things I want to say today are essentially very empirically based and very thoroughly tested. The first is that all job growth, all net job growth in the United States for at least 30 years comes from firms that are new, not small, new, from firms that are less than 5 years old. So the generator of jobs in the United States is brand new firms. And to put it more starkly, with the chart I have in my hand here, if we didn't have new firms, there are years in the last 25 years where we would have been net down as many as 3 million jobs if we didn't have new job starts. So this is a critical issue. Now, to make it more immediate, over the last 7 recessions, the recessions have largely been resolved by new firm starts. That is to say, in recessions, new firms actually go up, starts go up. This is the first time in our data series that actually starts are going down. And therein is a really troublesome issue, because if you take civilian employment and look out into the future, we don't have job starts. This perspective will get bleaker. So I want to just propose maybe 5 things to think about. And the first is almost an emergency. Let's pull the firebox. And it goes to the question of immigration. And one of our senior scholars, Paul Prigosky, had a piece of yesterday's Wall Street Journal on this topic. And basically what we're arguing for is that the government think about an entrepreneur's visa, if you will. And this sort of has 2 different perspectives. One is we would invite many entrepreneurs, scientists, engineers from around the world to come here and to give them immediate access. Now, this is, I think, we actually have thought very deeply about this. Bob is a lawyer. We have a lot of lawyers on our staff to figure out how we can do this politically. You actually have an EB-5 visa, which oddly permits non-native born foreigners who are venture capitalists to come to the United States and work. America doesn't need any more venture capital. Let me suggest to you, America doesn't need any more venture capital. Regardless of what you hear, venture capitalists don't start businesses, entrepreneurs start businesses. We can just sort of do a little regulatory twitch, deny the entrepreneur, the venture capitalists, and invite the folks who are hell-bent on starting a business in the United States. But what's more important are the foreign-born who come to the United States for education. And I think our view ought to be, if they're going to stay here with their American-acquired education and start a business, you immediately grant them citizenship. Now, this is really important. At least 1/4 of our high-tech businesses, and Eric will appreciate this, probably between 40 and 50% of starts in the last 25 years in the Silicon Valley have been non-native born entrepreneurs. We start high-growth companies, which is another clue here. We have to focus on high-growth firms. Only about 0.3% of firms that are started every year turn out to be huge high-growth firms. Someplace between 300 and 1,000 are started every year. But those account for 10% of the new job creation. So it's all well and good, and one of the things I would recommend against is we don't constantly merge this notion, it's a European phrase, small and medium. There are small businesses, and there are high potential entrepreneurially established businesses.
This is a
That's gotta be
very
the target.
interesting, important point, I think, that we're talking a lot about. The SBA, you know, there's Main Street small businesses, which we care a lot about and fund, and when one closes, we need to be there to fund the next one. There's also these high-growth, high-impact businesses, and we're doing a lot of thinking about how to, and they have different needs. One size doesn't fit all, and I think that's something you've been very helpful in pointing out.
One of the things that will be coming down the pipe from our research department will be a real autopsy about how venture capital works. We sent out a little salvo, Harold Bradley, who was our investment manager, and I had a piece of business last week that has upset some people in the venture capital community. We get two types of hate mail. One is in relation to our position on immigration, and the other is from people with very fancy stationery who live on Sand Hill Road. The point is, we need venture capital, but we probably need 3 different types of venture capital firms moving forward. I'll just quickly say there are 4 other thoughts we have. One is, we have about 42,000 people in limbo after getting their PhD. These are postdocs. These people control a huge amount of intellectual property. They've created it. It never occurs to them to start businesses. So we're encouraging, in fact, we've taken a step in this direction, to actually grant postdoctoral fellowships. We'll have about 60 people studying in the Kauffman Foundation this year in this position. Figure out how they can start a high-growth, high-potential technology business. We, of course, would sound the noise that payroll tax holiday is a very good sign, and might it be just for firms that are less than 5 years old, and with that we might consider some relaxation of various regulations, particularly labor regulations, but in certain cases there are other types of regulations that apply to the industry in which the new firm operates, that if relaxed, at least until the firm is up and running, maybe 4 or 5 years old, would prove to be really particularly useful. And I think the last thing probably is to think very carefully about the symbolism of new regulation and old regulation. It is very much poo-pooed, and I think our analysis, which we have checked with one eminent economist after the other, is that the symbolic issues related to Sarbanes-Oxley are arresting in terms of how capital markets work to new entrepreneurs. And while people poo-poo this, you can't from the perspective of the symbolism of government trying to establish rules about how businesses work. So net-net.
Sorry, could you make that point again? I didn't hear you. Sarbanes-Oxley.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Mr. Secretary. Basically, the notion that you could actually take your firm into the public market, and this is really important because it has chain reaction downstream. Okay, so for example, since Sarbanes-Oxley has been passed, the number of firms that go to IPO that are venture-backed has been cut by about 80%.
So you're speaking against Sarbanes-Oxley.
Yes.
For
Yes.
small firms, right?
Pardon? Yeah.
On the size thing. It's something I know that has
There's
had
a
some
long,
discussion.
there's a whole separate discussion with Sarbanes-Oxley. What happened was it effectively slowed down the entire supply chain of venture investments because it changed the probability of exit strategy from IPO to acquisition by this huge factor. These numbers are huge. So it's not just a perception issue, it's real. What happened was the Bush administration, they actually relaxed some of the terms for small businesses and fundamentally didn't go far enough.
Now, could we, as we go around,
Karen?
Yep.
Carl, you can speak this if you want. Anybody else can, but let's just talk about this tax set of issues for just a sec. There are, as you read, there are 2 ideas in the air that people have proposed on the tax side now. One is a temporary payroll tax holiday of sub-magnitude. The other is an idea that was kicking around last fall, early stages of the Recovery Act, which is to provide a credit to firms that increase hiring. New jobs tax credit. Lots of different ways to design these things. There is a lot of skepticism in the business community and in the academic community about whether these buy you much. The simple version of a story would be people hire on the basis of whether they feel like demand for their products is going to increase, and a small change or a temporary change in the cost of a new employee is not going to change how many people you hire.
Agreed.
But the debate is more complicated than that, and I'd be interested in knowing, Eric, I'm sure, Joe, you've got the view on this, about what you think about those forms of use of what are scarce resources of the government now. Joe, you want to?
Okay. Let me, I think a payroll tax probably is not a very good idea because it's not targeted. And I also worry because it's linked to our Social Security system, and there are problems of viability, and that linking would be a bad one from a social perspective. I think a little bit more about more positively about the tax credit linked to increased hiring. I think very hard to know whether that's going to have a very big effect because of exactly the uncertainty over all the things that people have talked about, lack of credit. I think it's likely not to be very determinative. Let me mention two other things that I think might be helpful in lower cost. One of them is something that I don't know if you remember at the beginning of the Clinton administration, where we also had we were worried about what we called how to design a low-cost stimulus. One of the tax ideas at the time was to extend the period over which you could, what do you call it?
Carry back losses?
Carry back losses. And the notion is that it's in effect a loan from the government, but it's based on a history. So it's and you don't have to fill out a form, it's a very simple, right now firms are having losses. So it's effectively a loan credit program, but, and there's no reason from a theoretical why the natural unit of time ought to be a year.
We're for, just to save time, we're for that.
Okay.
Okay, and Congress is too, and in fact, Gene, if I'm not mistaken, are on the verge of legislating that.
That's right.
Okay,
And
so
the
that's-
initial stimulus goes for small businesses to back to 5 years. Now, it actually has been legislated for larger.
Although,
So it's just expanded and extended.
yeah, with one qualification though,
Right.
it should be linked only if they do investment. So if they're not doing investment, it's just right now we have a real, there's a concern about the deficit. It should be linked to investment or hiring, incremental hiring. So
Incremental hiring.
it should be again as a conditional tax benefit, not just to anybody who has losses, because that really is could be a big gift to the banks, who people already feel got some big gifts, as you know. The second point,
Banks are excluded.
banks were still part of it. Okay. The second,
Unless they're doing small business lending. Or participating in small business lending programs.
And had never participated.
And had never, okay, Jim, go ahead.
so anyway, you can figure
Right.
out the right conditioning. The second one is to pick up on this point about domestic versus foreign investing and employment creation. The question is, there is a feeling, and I don't know whether any of this has been corrected. I know there have been some proposals to correct it, that the current tax law allows people to keep their funds abroad, effectively lowering the effective tax rate if you're abroad. And so that's really tilting investment and job creation abroad. So while there
We
are,
also proposed that. That has not met with much enthusiasm
No, I
in the
know.
business community, as you may have heard, but.
yeah, but I just want to say you're doing the right thing. And sometimes I do criticize you, but I think in that area you're doing the right thing, and you should just push it. And it seems to me it's obvious, you know, the fact that somebody screams says that you're doing the right thing because they're getting
Sometimes
a
that's
tax
right.
benefit.
Sometimes that's right, Joe, I agree. Okay,
Secretary, can I offer a perspective from the nonprofit community?
absolutely.
Nonprofit community is about 10% of the workforce. About 77.5% have employees of fewer than 100. So this is really the small, any tax.
Small enterprise.
Very small enterprises. You know, so 65% have fewer than 25 employees. Only 6% have 1,000 employees or more. So this is mostly very small enterprises. Any kind of benefits that you do in the form of tax incentives and so on don't affect the nonprofit community, even though they employ 14 million people. 14. We don't have a natural home like the Small Business Administration. And so, in fact, the only place that we really are housed is through the IRS, and that's through oversight and governance. That's not really in terms of encouraging this community to provide to provide the kinds of services that they provide and the employees that they support. And one of the points that I wanted to make is that even as you think of ways to help small business, I think at the back of your minds, if you would keep remembering that as you do that, and I know Gina and I might talk soon about this, that
Have you spoken to him already?
no, we
Is he
just
singing
talked
you?
about talking about this. So, but we
He's a
will.
big believer in what you're saying in the case direction.
I would believe that. But I want to just come back for a minute to the credit issue. Because if you look at the nonprofit community, about 54% of the nonprofit community is made up of organizations that provide health and welfare, health and human service kinds of programs. Those, they get most of their money from government funding, its contracts and so on. What's happened during this time with the credit market is that since most of the money goes through state governments, that states have delayed reimbursements and they have traditionally depended on loans from banks to make up the difference.
Right, same problem sitting here.
States in now delaying reimbursements from 3 months to 6 months and longer, that's one problem. The other problem is that the money isn't available for credit. And so what's happening is that these organizations that have an increasing demand for service don't have the support and are simply shutting down, which means that that's creating a reverberating crisis for the most vulnerable populations. We think that we've got to fix that system of contracts so that in fact we're states, there is one state, Massachusetts, that pays regularly up front and that there isn't a problem, but it's the only state. And so we have to fix that problem. But I think in the meantime we need some kind of revolving loan fund to ease this crisis. We've done quite a lot of work and we've got the research. I can provide that with you. I can talk to Jean about that as well, about how to do that, since we spent the last year testing out how to do this best. But if we don't do this kind of thing right now, these organizations will reduce their workforce and will have the added problem of that. But I just want to end my comment. We've got lots of suggestions of how to fix this, but we have to think of a way, as you think about all these problems, addressing small business, also to include the nonprofit community.
Yeah, it's a very helpful point. And it's true, we don't have a real home for them, and it's not covered in tax policy. I want to just make sure that we cover our friend. We have some folks from Labor here, and I want to make sure that you had a chance.
Sure.
To Bill
Bill
and
Hyde.
Ed as well.
Bill Height and Ed Hill. I'm the president of the Plumbers Union, Plumbers and Pipe Fitters International Union. And just to give you a little overview, we have about 350,000 members. And the vast majority of our members work for small businesses all around the country. So we see it every day. And of course, we've listened to what everybody said. And money is a big problem. Going out there, getting funding is a problem. And also money to get these projects stimulated and get them on the books and get them going. That's a huge problem too, that we see all over the place. One thing we do spend a lot of money on is training. We probably have 50,000 apprentices, and we spend $160 million a year on training our people. So we do have a skilled workforce out there ready to go to work when these projects break. Another thing that I see as a problem, especially along the Gulf Coast, we have a problem with foreign workers coming over here doing construction work under visas. There's these new visas that are out there, I believe they're E2 visas, and there's literally thousands of foreign workers in here doing construction work that we could do, and we have tens of thousands of our members that are off of work that would be there in a heartbeat doing them jobs. And so some way we got to put a stop to it. It's not right. When you have Americans trained and certified to do work on a construction project, and you're bringing in foreign workers to take their spots, that's not right. That's got to be straightened out. And that's the major complaint. And everything we heard here, I personally agree with. We got to free up money, and not only to the small businesses, but to the people who will, in the construction industry, employ them small businesses. You know, we got to get people.
Construction company here,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, my name is Zor Fulwalder. I'm owner of Mobbit Construction Services. We're out of Scottsdale, Arizona, and I hear exactly what you're saying. We have the privilege of have been in. We're part of a larger company called Mobbit Companies, which has been around for 30 years, and we're very well capitalized. As far as lending goes, we experienced some trouble, and somebody's talking about small banks and creation of new banks. We had what we thought was a great relationship with Chase Bank, and all of a sudden, I guess we were in some category as a small business or something. They called our note, and we'd never been late. We have literally millions of dollars in their bank. So we had to go to Commerce Bank, I believe it's out of Connecticut, and they extended us our lines of credit. And we have no idea why Chase, and we never got really a satisfactory.
How quickly did it take? How quickly were you able to shift and find somebody else willing to fund this?
It was funny because actually when this was going on, one of the partners was being bought out, and when we shifted banks, when we got our credit line with Chase, credit was flowing freely, and pretty much you said to sign something. When we went to the Commerce Bank, the due diligence and everything was extensive, and it was a lot more of a process, and it took about a month to establish the line of credit, to move all of our accounts over. But the problem of the small undercapitalized, the companies that don't have access to credit, affects us. We were working on a large casino project in Scottsdale, Arizona, approximately a $500 million project that happened during the middle of the recession. And plumbers, their trailer was right next to ours, and they have to complete their work. This phase we're doing metal stud and drywall. They have to complete their work before we can get to ours, and they weren't completing their work on time. So I went over there and I asked him. I said, "What's happening?" He goes, "Well, the bank is slow to pay to pay the owner, to pay the general contractor, to pay me, and the bank stopped my line of credit." Okay, that's normally that'd be his problem, but now it's my problem because it slows down my workers, and the longer they're not doing sitting out there, the clock is running. The longer they're out there not doing anything, it eats into my margin, and it affects everyone. And I love the idea of small banks. As a construction company owner, we build the venues for things to happen. And what you were talking about sounds very exciting to me. I mean, I think what this recession has caused is, I guess, I don't think any of us as business owners will be the same after this, but it's caused us to think at things differently. And I see it like, I have people, and you probably see it too, people that were, in my particular sector, it's former mortgage brokers going into construction now. You see people that are having to integrate themselves into the economy in a different way, and take on jobs that that are going to match this new economy, the way things are after the recession. And one of the things that Mobbit Companies is doing, and we're looking for, is getting into different areas, green technologies, medical technologies. The problem is we're all construction guys, we're finance guys. We have a commercial real estate development wing, which isn't doing so great right now. But we want to look at the long term, and I think bringing this brain power to the United States is really going to help all sectors of mobbed companies, and particularly mobbed construction. But just to switch points a little bit, I'm from Arizona.
Make sure, we only have a few minutes left, so I just want to make sure we get folks who haven't talked, and I promise Cheryl.
Karen, we have till 35 now.
We have till 35. All right, so we have 5 more minutes. All right, so you.
Just
let
one
you
quick
back.
point. I'm from Arizona. They're very critical of the Obama administration. But what I don't realize from the ground level is that these jobs are going to be there. And we created 100 jobs last quarter. We have work that is the direct result of stimulus monies, recovery monies, universities mainly, in the state of Wisconsin. We're going to create 600 jobs in the next 2 quarters. And it's really a matter of that money working its way through the bureaucracy. The conditions are there, they're conducive for economic growth, and the banking, and it's got to be there to allow these people to seize it. That's it.
That's great. All right, Cheryl.
Yes, hi, I just, small company, 120 person company, we created 60 jobs this year. I had a similar credit story over the summer.
What kind of company is it?
Oh, information technology. We serve both commercial and government clients in a variety of business and technology areas. We had a similar story over the summer in terms of trying to get capital. I had to liquidate my life savings. I went to 10 banks. I had to deal with a cash flow positive in 3 months for 2 governments. I had the people in line in mission critical parts of the agency. Couldn't get the money. The banks forced me to liquidate my life savings, put it in cash where I earned 1%, charged me 5% on the money I borrowed, and on top of that, they basically redid the terms of my line of credit. I had 3 years of nothing but profitable growth. And so that is one. And I would say that I think that browbeating the banks isn't the way to go here. I think the reality is for small businesses, what we need to do is really think about incentivizing angel investors. What I mean by that, Virginia and Texas did this, and it's been very successful. Provide a tax credit for angel investors. $1,000, $2,000, $10,000, $50,000, it doesn't really matter. I think the important thing is there's people who want to start auto repair shops, people who want to start haircut companies, they want to start any kind of company, and they have to go to their parents and their mom and their dad and their friends. We started a Web 2.0 platform to basically provide efficiencies for small businesses to share information. I also started this company, and we have 5,000 members, 4 Fortune 500 companies that now belong to this Web 2.0 platform. I cannot raise money for this. I'm tapped out. I'm selling the technology to a larger company. I would have created 15 or 20 jobs to provide this network for small businesses to learn from one another. So that's one. The second thing, I think, is to really reduce and increase the velocity of money. When I say increase the velocity of money, what I'm talking about is 3 things. Reduce or eliminate the regulatory burdens on small businesses. It is costing me per employee $7,600 per employee to meet regulatory burdens versus a company that's greater than 500.
For example,
Regulatory
OSHA, what?
Everything, you name it. It can be accounting. The accounting standards come out with FASB and say you have to do mark to market. My auditors come to me and say $10,000 more in auditing fees. I got healthcare costs. The healthcare companies measured me on my 50 people. I had 2 people who have a big claim, and guess what? I get slammed. There is a list, unions, hardship. You tell me I've got to worry about hiring lawyers and lobbyists, and then I don't have unions in my business, and I'm already in a very competitive field. I mean, there's a whole list of these, and by the way, they're good regulations. They are needed, absolutely. But a small business, you can't layer costs on costs, because that's less money I can put in the market, and I can invest in R&D or whatever. And the third thing, I would say, that's easier to do business with. And the third thing is leveraging tools and technologies to get efficiencies in small business. Online training is another platform that we provide because I saw the pains. Get small business, affirmative action plans. How do I write a affirmative action plan? How do I mean, tax compliance, FAR, this stuff is overwhelming for small businesses.
Right, this is something that we actually are doing a big initiative on, because the technology, thank you, is now at a stage where small businesses want to have their loan application online, they want to take their training online, they want to know how to get a government contract online, so this is great input. Okay, yes.
An area that we haven't talked about, and I know there's another segment going on, but I think this is a good venue to talk about it.
tax-free.
My name's David Acker with a company called Air Tractor in Alny, Texas. 200 employees, small business, rural Texas. You don't get much more country than I do and where we're from. But we do 45% of our new production or export sales. This country has a great opportunity
All right,
to
yeah,
produce
you're right.
more jobs quickly through exports, but the word isn't out there.
So
We've got to get the
45% of your sales are export sales?
Yes, they are. So 90 people in Alny, Texas, whether they know it or not, jobs belong because we're selling outside of the United States. And it's not a costly program. It's not something that it's really getting the word out. The infrastructure is there in the banks.
Talk more about this getting the word out, because you probably know, and there's a parallel session that Larry Summers is actually running totally on exports. This is something that we have a big initiative on, cross-agency initiative on small business exports. One of the things is, a lot of them don't because why? Because they don't know how, right?
Well, it's a little.
They don't have access.
First of all, let's go to maybe a little more pinpoint. They need financing for their end users or whatever. I know you've got a working capital guarantee program, but still, they go to the bank. That's their first source. And they ask the bank to help them on their export finance. There's a lot of banks and there's a lot of good at trade finance banks, but there are a lot of banks in this country that do not know the export finance. They can't talk to them. If their bank can't talk to them, then they don't know, and it's hard. It is hard. The Export-Import Bank of the United States is doing a good job. The word has got to get out more, and the infrastructure is there in the commercial banks, and we're not doing a good job of that. I'll be quick about this. Another thing that I would like to see happen is that, and it's been discussed, but to see an assistant USTR for small business, so that there is a place besides just the lending, from tariffs, entering new markets, and that sort of thing, to come to.
That's a very good point. We make sure we have Gene on this. Have USTR, he says a USTR for small business, but this is something Ron Kirk really cares about.
An assistant USTR for small business.
Or at least the focus, we're collaborating on that focus. Go ahead.
And then just the cross-pollination across agencies to think export. Small business export, but all export. Because that is a great way to produce United States jobs. All of our planes are made in Alny, Texas, but 45% of those planes go outside of the United States. There was an article or speech that Commerce Secretary Locke did not too long ago, and he mentioned that maybe we haven't had the focus and the passion for this area since the death of Ron Brown. I mean, we need to find that point person, whether it's Secretary Locke or whoever, to bring the infrastructure. The skeleton is there. We need to put the meat on the bones, do more exporting, and it creates jobs.
So you make crop dusters, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I know about your company.
Another thing
Tim,
on this
do you
export
wanna-
agenda that you may hear the president talk about is he's initiated a comprehensive review of our export control laws, which were designed in a different era,
Amen.
different purpose. And what's very important about this is that Secretary Gates is playing a leadership role in trying to figure out how to relax these, sensibly redesign them, modernize them, and I think that would make a difference, a big difference.
We have to deal with the export compliance laws. We're a small company, and it's and going to conferences and paying the regulatory costs to hire people to do this. Even the large companies, it seems like, are having difficulty in navigating export compliance laws. It's and the scary part is, if you don't do it, it is going to be very, very costly to you.
I want to add one more thing on the regulatory environment in a positive way. That is to say that there are some excellent small business incentives out there, but I don't think there's enough teeth for it right now. What happens is I've got 27 contract vehicles that I'm on, where I'm spun my wheels, writing proposals, working with these large companies. That's real money for me, and I don't get I have 27 contract vehicles with not one stitch of work out of any of them, because there's no teeth. The intention is there, and I know that's because you all are trying and doing great things, but I think the whole teeth behind these incentives and anything we do come up with has to kind of have that element, which I'm sure you're working on.
Yeah, no, it's actually a very important point that we're working on. So, Tim, do you want to
Pretty good summary.
wrap up a
More
little bit?
teeth behind the incentives.
Right.
Not bad.
Right. There you go.
I think you should focus on revenue. A lot of these things are about increasing revenue. Revenue solves all money problems.
Exports and markets, increase revenue.
Focus on revenue.
On getting growth back.
Just revenue, right? Whatever's in the way of getting revenue to grow.
Well, I think we've heard a number of things that are extremely valuable. I know that what's happening as we spoke is that Jean and I think Ginger, who were there, were airlifting that stuff back into a summary that the president is seeing kind of real time. We're going to break in about 2 minutes, right? And we're going to go back downstairs, and you wouldn't be surprised maybe to hear some of your words reflected in some of the things that he's been thinking about. From my point of view, and Jim, you might want to wrap also, this is really helpful. We heard a lot of these things that we've been hearing on the access to credit are really problems that Secretary Geithner has been deeply engaged in showing leadership on, and we're working very hard to engage in as well. I think there's really something in this entrepreneurship, high growth, high impact. We're very focused on how to take some of this innovation, support these high growth, smaller businesses, as well as our Main Street businesses, and take these online tools and technologies as well to make sure we've got sort of maximum penetration of the opportunities that we have, whether it's exports or procurement or some of the other things.
Tax incentives, credit and capital, SBA innovations, well-designed regulatory relief. President, you're going to see the Congress and President working together in the next few weeks and months on whether there are targeted new opportunities that we can sensibly use taxpayers' money to catalyze more investment, more finance, more growth. A bunch of that's going to involve the SBA, and we're working with the TARP program to make sure that the resources we've taken back out of the banking system we can devote to help reinforce progress in these other areas. Very helpful. You guys know how to reach us. Keep in touch. You can get in touch with Karen or with me or with Gene Sperling, who's sitting over there.
Right.
And let us know if you have more ideas going forward. And you'll see this move in the next few weeks and months. We won't solve all these things right away, but we're going to keep at it. We'll keep trying things, testing different things, see if we can make a better impact on these things. But very grateful to see you. Grateful you're spending some time, and keep at it. We're making some progress.
Thanks.